Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly virtual discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with University of Michigan Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. And today I have two special guests, Vanessa Denha-Garmo and Zara, who are co-producers of a documentary called Marked. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So Vanessa, you've been here before, and Vanessa is a communication strategist, content creator, and coach, and she is the founder of Epiphany Communications and Coaching. And Zara is the CEO and founder of Geektown USA, as you can see on his beautiful screen. They're going to tell you about the documentary that was completed in, was it 2015?
Yeah, 2015. Yeah.
2015, so let's really just start by asking, me asking you, what is the film Marked about?
You want to take that one, Al?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
it's really the untold stories of the Iraqi Christians and their persecutions. And we try to give some background history of the Christians in Iraq and in that region, and just the persecution from the beginning until really this day and age, until today. So I feel like it's a glimpse of what's really going on, but to give the world an insight on the untold stories of the Iraqi Christians.
You know what I found? I don't know if you planned this, Leanne, but it was ironic. I watched the documentary to kind of refresh my memory, and there's two people in the documentary that talked about the invasion in 2014, and they were forced out of their home exactly 7 years ago today on August 6th. And I thought, wow, did we not plan that?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I think God planned it. I'll give that one over to God.
It was August 6th, 2014, when ISIS invaded and forced everybody out of their home. So 7 years ago today.
Wow. Interesting. And actually, this wasn't planned. We just do our shows on Fridays. But also it just happens. I hadn't asked you about this before, but also that it happens in August exactly. So, and it seems like it's really not a long time. I mean, based on what happened, sometimes we do tend to forget those the tragedy of what happened. And when I was recently watching the documentary, it was just like, wow, this should not be forgotten. That is what happened is just like this genocide. But I want you guys to talk about this. Is first, how did you come together to create this documentary? What inspired it?
So ECRC has a film division called Martoma Productions, and we produce Catholic programming that's seen all over the globe. So at Norsat and at Catholic television networks here and on YouTube. And on Facebook, we do live Facebook. So we were talking about wanting to really document what the Christians have gone through since the beginning of time in terms of being the Church of the Martyrs, being persecuted because of the invasion in 2014. It really inspired us to want to educate the rest of the world about what the Christians have suffered since the beginning of time. So, it was myself, Karen Banham, Zara, and Fadi Atisha who kind of came together. And we decided to outline a documentary, what it would look like, how would we put it together. And then hours and hours and hours and hours later, I don't even countless hours later, we finally had a finished product.
Yeah, and I remember at the time, I remember the bishop calling me and saying, this would be something really interesting, pray about it. And then, knowing Vanessa was involved, Karam, and Fadi, it just made it that much easier for me personally to volunteer our time to do this. And remember, Vanessa, we had to do a full feature documentary, it's 40 plus minutes. We worked with a tiny budget that we had to work with, and I believe there was a fifth person. I think we all believe there was a fifth person, that the Holy Spirit drove the project, because there were moments of times that we were pretty much stuck. Some of the footage that we were looking for, the church bombings, or we couldn't find them. We were knocking on every door, calling AP, calling Fox, emailing everyone. And by the grace of God, I got to give this organization props, SAT7. They're out of Egypt, SAT, the number 7. I don't know how I got connected with them, but I emailed the guy, and one of their directors reached out to me and said, "What are you looking for? What are you trying to do?" When I told him, he literally said, "I'm going to send you a link for Dropbox." And there were all this amazing footage of church bombings and like B-rolls that we're able to use, that he just said, use it. No cost, nothing. So that was just an amazing thing that came about, out of nowhere.
Yeah, I forgot about that, Al. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, that was so
Yeah,
important.
because I did see that there is a lot of interesting footage. You did interview a lot of people, or you got the interviews from people that are there, however you guys got it, but that's why it ended up to be a really nice project. And, you bring up something you bring up the current situation of the Christians in Iraq from the beginning of the documentary. And then you say that it's important to show the current situation in order to understand the history. So you kind of do it the other way around, and the politics behind it. So really, what is the politics behind it? And did you learn of all that as you were creating the film and finding out about the history and the current situation?
Yeah, I think first of all, the politics really started with the 2003 invasion, and that's kind of where we started the documentary, because we wanted to explain to people what happened in recent years, and then we took them back in time. And so with the U.S. invading Iraq in 2003 and toppling Saddam Hussein, the entire country changed. And I remember when that was happening, I was doing interviews on local media, national media, explaining that you can't just go into a country like Iraq and say, woof, you're going to be a democracy tomorrow. That doesn't happen. And so the toppling of Saddam Hussein, and you'll see throughout the documentary of bishops and priests explaining to the people what happened after that happened. And so there was a political issue. And then after that, it just welcomed all these terrorists to come in and take down Christians. Before 2003, there were more than 1 million Christians in Iraq. Today, there's less than 250,000, even less probably.
Less.
I don't know,
Yeah,
Al, you want
I
to
just
add to that?
interviewed somebody from Iraq, from Shlama, and there's less than 150,000.
Wow, that's so
I believe
sad.
it. And even prior to 2003, just me personally living in Iraq, knowing that there were Sunni, there were the minority of Muslims, and then there were the Shia, the majority, and Saddam was a Sunni. So he took care of his people, the Sunnis, and there were the Kurds, and then there was the minority Christian population in Iraq. I'm talking 80s, 90s, early 2000s. We were never a threat. We kind of just did our thing, but we're also protected under the Saddam regime because of not being a threat. So that political aspect had a lot to do with, when Saddam left or, got dethroned and the new governments came that were majority Shiite, it left Christians very vulnerable, and it left an opportunity for these terrorist groups to take advantage of the vulnerability that the Christians had. And now we're left with, the persecutions and the scattered of all Christians, all over. I mean, we have families in Australia, in Netherlands, and anywhere we could find asylum. Fortunately, we were able to come to the U.S. and make a great living here and a land of opportunity. But a lot of people don't have that, and until today, there was a lot of persecution. We talk about human rights these days, and it's a big topic. But unfortunately, the mainstream media is not touching on, one of the biggest human rights issues that has been happening in several years with the Christians in Iraq and Christians in other countries. I mean, let's not forget there are other countries that have, a lot of persecutions towards Christians, but in Iraq, it's a dire situation still till today.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that it seems like certain groups, whoever is persecuted, should be it should be acknowledged and seen how that group can be helped, no matter what their background. And it does seem like sometimes there are certain groups that do get that attention and others don't. And really, the sad part about what you said, Vanessa, about what happened in Iraq in 2003 is that when the borders were open and the terrorists came, most of the people that harmed the Iraqi minorities were non-Iraqis.
Yeah.
They were people that came in, and then they kind of, they built camp there, and then they became part of that country just by letting themselves in. So yeah, there was a lack of responsibility from that angle as well, and unfortunately even affected other people in Iraq. And you talk about what I'd like to for people to also, if you can touch upon the Christianity in Mesopotamia, how was it introduced to the people of that region? And what was the language of the time, just so that people can see that the length of time that Chaldeans had been in that region.
Well, I mean, St. Thomas the Apostle evangelized the faith to the Christians in that region. And Chaldeans speak the language Christ spoke, a dialect of it, which is Aramaic. And so it was St. Thomas the Apostle and in Mar Adde who really introduced Christianity to the Chaldeans there and converted us to Christianity at that time in that region. Al, is there anything else you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Mesopotamia and like that, we're talking about very, very old times, and the history is so rich. So to echo, Vanessa's statement, a lot of the things that were done, it was almost trying to eliminate the history of Christianity in that region. It was more than just, going after Christians. It was going after Christians and the history. So as you can see, all the vandalization that happened in the churches, all the burnings of the books. I mean, these were done very methodically, in my opinion, and not just as let's eradicate Christians from that area. Let's eradicate the history altogether. Yeah.
That's a great point, Al. It was very deliberate. And I think that's a really good point, to wipe out the history of Christianity in that region. I mean, we were the natural original inhabitants of that region, and slowly have been wiped out over time. So that's a really good point.
And in the documentary, Bishop Ibrahim talks about a once good time for Christians in Iraq. What was that time, and and what was life for them like at that time?
Al, I think you could talk about that since you have lived there.
Yeah, I mean, my personal experience in the 80s, I was young, but I mean, I remember it vividly. And I remember my dad talking to me about, how Christians were treated fairly. There were opportunities for Christians. I mean, no different than how it is here in the US with everyone. Like it was equal opportunities. We even had our neighbors were Jewish, in the 80s, my dad told me. So it was much more free country. The democracy was, better, much better than what it is today. But Christians were always felt like they had a home, I'd say. I've mentioned this to Vanessa before. I feel like Chaldeans in particular, our home has always been Jesus Christ, because we're minorities in Iraq and we're minorities here, and we're pretty much minorities wherever we go, but we have our strong backbone of Christ to call our home. But Christians were treated much different, but over time it very quickly changed for the worse.
Yeah, that's it's funny because sometimes I tell people like I'm an expert at being a minority, because of the fact that being a minority, a minority in Iraq, and being a minority here, and then on top of a woman minority, and so it's like, if you want to talk to minorities, like we're the minorities of the minorities of the minorities.
Exactly, yeah.
And we have found, and because of that, sometimes we have to rely on our faith and just our community, because we see that sometimes you see like your minority group doesn't really fit into anything. And then you kind of learn that from Iraq, that, you just kind of have to find your way and just wing it as you're going along, as you're trying to survive.
And here in America, we're not even identified as a minority, which is so ridiculous, but that's a whole other story.
We're the privileged white people.
Yeah. We're not
identified because in the census and because of the religion, but and this is why we like to bring awareness, is just an opportunity to share our stories and to acquaint people with us. And I have found that normally when we do that, people are interested and they do listen. So, and we are doing our part. So thank God for that, So during the Persian Empire, it was brought up several times during the documentary, and what was life for them then? And was that the time that the Christianity's oppression and all that started?
Well, Ismet Karmo, so a few people addressed that in the documentary. Ismet Karmo first talks about the Christian, how they were being suppressed during that time. And then Dave Nona weaves in how the St. Thomas the Apostle passed through Mesopotamia with Ma'adeh, establishing Christianity. But Christianity was a threat. And then Bishop Ibrahim elaborates on that along with Shamasha Khedi Fumia, and talking about Christianity didn't easily spread at this time, and they were killed and murdered. And there was this 40-year persecution in the 4th century where Mar Shamun Bar Sabai was beheaded along with many other people, ordered by the Persian king, because he said they went against the state. And really, what they were saying was, no, it wasn't because we went against the state, it was because we were Christian. And so you saw this persecution of Christianity since the beginning of Christianity. And that's why we're called the Church of the Martyrs, or the Blood of the Martyrs, because as I think it was Father Douglas who said in the documentary, he said, there is more blood of the martyrs than there is oil in Iraq. And that's how many Christians have been persecuted in this region.
Yeah, and it really is since beginning of time. I mean, with Jesus Christ's persecution, John the Baptist, I mean, you name it, from the beginning. And unfortunately, I don't think that's stopping. I mean, I think we're at a silent, spiritual war right now, dealing with, battles and sins. But outside of that, there's a real battle against, Christianity and faith all over. So we just always have to defend what we can control, in my opinion.
One of the priests quotes a verse from the Bible, Matthew 26:52, that live by the sword, die by the sword. And there's an emphasis in the documentary about Chaldeans being peaceful people who don't resort to fighting. From your research, do you find that this is part of their characteristics, or is it because as a minority, they felt they were in no position to fight?
Well, how Father Douglas approached that when he was quoted saying, live by the sword, die by the sword, he was talking about how we focus on Christ and not the fight. We're not fighting people, and we are Christians. And so, yeah, I'm sure being a minority was weaved into that issue of why we didn't take up our arms. But as Father Douglas noted in that documentary, that if they were armed, they could have actually taken down the terrorists probably in 6 hours in Mosul. But they chose not to fight, to kill. They chose to follow Christ and focus on their faith, and they left. And so I think what's really ingrained in them is their Christian faith and the fact that they are minorities. But I really think it's the faith and Christ, because we're not raised to fight and kill. That's not how we're taught. That's not how we're raised. We're raised to be faithful followers of Jesus Christ.
And I mean, to echo that, it's our faith teaches us, love and mercy. So the root of our faith is to love each other and forgive each other. Obviously, the Lord has given us free will to make decisions. So we're not just going to be sitting there, they were given, a lot of these families were given 24-hour notice with the marking of the N. And as you see in the documentary, I think I have one back here, this N is Nazareth. This is the N that was marked on the homes of the Christians in the villages to either convert to Islam, leave within 24 hours, or die. So
or pay
a lot
a
of them
tax,
chose to leave, or pay a tax. But a lot of them were persecuted and martyred over, this is your home, and overnight you want to leave. So the option to leave was there. Some people chose, but no one chose to fight. Like to Vanessa's point, and that is like the teaching of our faith. It's not, we don't live by the sword. It's not in the Bible. It's not in our teachings. It's all about love and mercy.
Yeah, it's interesting when I heard him saying that, because I know that from the past and from, I was a journalist for over 10 years with the Chaldean News. So I would interview a lot of people that would say things similar to what we experienced when we left Iraq. Is that I remember, like, my parents did not want my brothers to fight in wars, and they knew that this was going to be their fate if we stay in that land. They also felt like for the girls, my dad felt like this is not like they might not have the same opportunities that they would have in the United States. And through my interviewing various people, I found that this was brought up a lot, that people felt like they didn't want their sons to enter into the wars. And now when I was watching the documentary and as it was mentioned, I thought, well, seems like something that's always coming up. And then there is that thing that like, we don't want to be a part of that, whatever that fighting may be. They didn't want to participate in wars. And then even when they came and then they were being pushed out of their homes, that was almost was the same attitude, like we'll just pack up and leave. We don't want to fight back in that sense, you know?
Yeah.
So I found that interesting that, you know, it just seems like part of our, and like even looking back when I see it's mostly consists of massacres towards that community or suppression towards that community. So,
yeah,
you know, you learn so much by watching that and just observing over the years what similar patterns.
Mhm.
I know you guys both have different experiences as, you know, so Vanessa, you were born here.
Yeah.
Correct? And Al, you were born in Iraq. And so, you know, coming together to put this documentary, so I'm sure there's different types of feelings that you have about what was happening. And I was just curious, like, how did the making of this documentary influence you? You know, I'm sure it influenced you, but in what ways? And just listening to your different experiences, given that one, you know, you were born here and you have connections to people in Iraq, probably, Al. Like more personal connections, I mean.
Personally, you know, making this documentary, we went through adversities and we really had some moments where we were stuck, and we had a short period of time to do the documentary. But I you know, looking at a lot of the stock, like not the stock, but the footage that we had of like a baby, you know, shot and killed in the church, or it really at some moments like that didn't make it on the film, right? That they were too gruesome, or it put things in perspective. You know, having young kids, myself, and you know, Vanessa having a beautiful young daughter, it's just like how lucky we are, how fortunate we are, how thankful to God we are to live here in a free country, and to get away from, you know, for me personally, I looked at these people and I thought to myself, that could easily be me.
Yeah.
And so like it gave me, you know, kind of motivation to help in any way I can. And mind you, we don't have the background to do a full feature documentary. You know, we did our best, but I feel like that's all we can give at the time is, you know, just do what we can, knock on as many doors. Fadi and Karam did a great job helping us with whatever we can. You know, everybody kind of came together and did their part.
We definitely did not have the resources. We didn't have the budget, and it was volunteer and hours, and we were all working full time. So, yeah. So I'm glad we did it. It's a wonderful project to be part of. You know, I kind of have Al and I kind of have a combination of both of your backgrounds. So you were born there and you're a journalist. You know, I co-owned the Chaldean News for 16 and a half years. And my experience is that very much of a journalist, even before then, covering Iraq and Chaldeans as a full-time reporter at WJR. So my perspective on the Christians in Iraq were my experience writing and interviewing people. And I remember writing stories for the Chaldean News and literally bawling, crying, and not having people hear me crying because I'm interviewing them about the atrocities and what they went through. I mean, a woman who actually watched her son be killed in front of her, another mom who killed her child because she didn't want the child to suffer by ISIS. I mean, these stories, another woman who was actually served her son's head on a platter of rice. I mean, these are just sick stories. And so, you know, my experience is not having lived there. I mean, I hear stories from my parents being born there, but my experience is having been a journalist and interviewing, I don't even know how many people in the years at WJR, the 16 and a half years I owned the Chaldean News. And so that's why this documentary really hit home. And to your point, you know, Al, I was, when we were putting this documentary together, I kept thinking, thank you, Lord Jesus, my parents came to America. Right. That's all I kept thinking. Thank you, Lord Jesus, that my parents came to America, because that could have been easy, you know, us too. Yeah. I agree.
You know, one of the things like, I mean, I'm so grateful you guys did bring awareness to this, but like as a journalist myself, and just even before like my involvement in writing, I was always interested to look at different stories, regardless of the background of those stories. And most people know me as being very positive, and I'm a very positive person, but I'm not afraid at looking at dark things that are happening. But I did feel that when it comes to certain communities, or like what happened when I was watching this documentary, I thought, why isn't there more light being shed on this? And why was it kind of like, it seems like it was swept under the rug very early on? And why are people afraid of looking at this? Because when we look at something, this is how we can help prevent it from happening again. And I watch a lot of I love documentaries, and I love watching and seeing what's happening in the world. Sometimes as dark as it is, I feel like it's our, we're responsible to at least look at it, to acknowledge, so that we can hear the different voices. And I found like there's a lot of other issues that are brought forth again and again, and are highlighted repeatedly, which there's no issue with that. But then I did find like, why isn't there really as much emphasis on this, even though it was so horrendous? And it's important for us to see, because even the regular Iraqis, the everyday Iraqis, this is not like what they participated in, and this is not what they want. They don't want this for their country. They don't want this happening there. I grew up in Baghdad, and my best friends were, Muslim, and this is not, they even had to get out of certain areas for their safety. So it's not just it doesn't serve anybody. So what are your last words about this? It's like, just something that you would like people to know, that would help bring more awareness to these kind of stories, especially with regards to our community that this happened to not that long ago. It was only like, what, 6 years ago. And some people that I've talked to, who have PhDs, who have said, oh, these kind of things happened 100 years ago. I know, I'm like, no, 2014 is not 100 years ago, but it seems like it almost feels like that for some people.
I think there's a twofold thing going on here, women. To your point, why is it swept under the rug? First of all, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I don't know if people remember the story of Rwanda, the Tutsis and the Hutsuts fighting each other and killing each other. That was a major massacre going on. And do you know what the top story in the United States was at that time that flooded all the media networks, and it had nothing to do with Rwanda? Do you know what the #1 story, and we were glued to the television for days? Was a white Bronco being chased by the police. O.J. Simpson. No joke.
I guessed it.
Okay. So our folks, and I blame, I'm from the media, but I blame, our us as a society being so interested in Hollywood and sensationalism, and O.J. Simpson, instead of caring about people being massacred in Rwanda. And so part of that is what we're being fed and what we want to eat. You know what I mean? Like what do we want to consume? We want to consume Hollywood news instead of being informed of what's going on around the world around us.
This is an addiction. This is you just pinpointed it is society, because we can't blame the media if they're feeding us what we want to look at, right?
Yeah, but it's twofold. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we're consumed, so that becomes the top story. We want Hollywood, we want sensation, whatever. At the same time, I think there's agendas at play too. There's politics at play. There's, they want certain things to happen a certain way. And so they give us certain information and instead of giving us, the stories that we really need to know to make objective decisions. So I think a lot of what's going on in the world is political divisiveness in this, and not just this country, all over the world. Yes. And politics has been part of an agenda for centuries. You know what I mean? This, you look back in any history and you say, you made a really good point. People not knowing this is happening yesterday, because history repeats itself when we don't learn from history. And we have seen this time and time and time again. We have repeated craziness over and over again because people don't want to learn from history. So I think a lot of dynamics play into that, to your point of why there's not more awareness. When the invasion happened, and I'll throw it over to Al, I have one more thought. When the invasion happened in 2014 with ISIS, there was virtually no media coverage except for Catholic radio here locally. And EWTN and Ave Maria or radio were the only ones covering the persecution of Christians for months before the secular media picked it up. And I know that for a fact, because I was on the air with them all the time, and nobody else was picking up these stories of what was happening in Iraq and interviewing bishops and persecuted Christians for months. And then the secular media started picking it up. So, that is an issue, and why that's happening. I think there's a lot that contributes to why that happens.
Right, and all great points, Vanessa. The thing we got to also remember is nobody wanted this, right? Not Muslims, not Kurdish, not Christians, not Yazidis that were persecuted, because a lot of Muslims got persecuted as well. Like, we can't forget about that. I have friends in every religion.
That's important to mention, because they were, millions of them were also affected. So this they were in a win-win situation.
Yeah,
absolutely. So this was not like a Muslim Christian thing. It was more like, when I say spiritual warfare that we're living in right now, it's evil against good. These acts that were done are not of good Muslim people that decided to switch overnight and kill these Christians. These were evil-rooted people that have evil spirits. And Bishop Francis taught me years ago he said, I encourage you to think on two different levels, on a human level and on a spiritual level. We adjust our frequencies when we speak to our kids. We have to lower our frequency or increase our frequency depending on who we're speaking to, so we can understand each other from a communication standpoint. But when we're dealing with evil spirits, they can come in through ISIS, coming in through Mosul and persecute and kill people. But it also can come through our phones, through social media. It can come through TV. It can come through radio. It can come through people that we are surrounded with. And that's, being a parent and a husband, like, I am constantly thinking about those things and how can I protect my surroundings from evil spirits entering in and, skewing, our mission of just trying to be good Christian people, love and mercy, the root of Christianity. So it's really unfortunate that it happened to our people. But I encourage all of us to kind of look around and see how we can protect our surroundings from evil spirits.
Amen to that, Al.
Thank you. That was beautifully said, because you're right. At the end of the day, that could come in from anywhere. And that's why it's important to look at these things. So to make sure that kind of evilness does not squeeze itself in, sneak itself, because that's usually how evil comes in, is through sneaking itself in and, using whatever methods and then killing and, doing all the atrocities. And so, and again, thank you so much for bringing awareness to this through the hard, I didn't even know, voluntary work of putting this documentary together. And, we look forward to, in the near future, of screening it somehow at the Chaldean Cultural Center. We'll talk about
that'd be great. Thanks,
that
would be wonderful.
I think it's an opportunity for people to see it and for you guys to talk a little bit more about your experience and all that. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mia. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.